Welcome, everybody, to the July 21st, 2022 special meeting of the Planning Board. And seeing we have a quorum, we will bring the meeting to order. If we could please rise and cite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now that we've called the meeting to order and had the pledge, there's a statement that we read before each planning board meeting. It has to do with conflict of interest, and I'll read it. Does any member of the planning board have a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest with regard to any item on the agenda? And if so, please state so at this time.
No.
Okay.
No, I do not.
No for me?
No.
I did not see it, but I'm assuming this is a UDO meeting, and for that reason, no.
Okay, thank you. We have a draft agenda before us. Richard indicated he had not received it. I thought it had been emailed out to all of us, but possibly it is not. Does anybody have any amendments to this draft agenda?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the draft agenda.
I second the motion. Or make a motion.
Make a motion.
Sorry.
Yeah, can we have a second?
Second.
No discussion, I guess, is needed. Unless, Richard, you want to have some discussion on it?
No.
All in favor?
If I could interrupt, I do want to mention one thing. I observed the meeting on July 7th and was really impressed with the quality of the dialogue. But I do want to bring to the board's attention, on June 21st, I was approached by the town attorney. And it appears that someone either on staff, council, or the planning board had expressed some concerns about my ability to be impartial as it pertains to a certain applicant before this board. I wanted to state on the public record, my goal here is to be independent and impartial as possible. I have a long-standing record of expressing my desire that this particular applicant succeed. However, I am the only person on this board that actually lives in Sea Trail. And so I do have a certain perspective in terms of some of the things that they're going to bring before this board. But I did want to bring to the attention of the board that conversation with the town attorney took place. It was very fruitful. I learned some things that I think I needed to learn in terms of how I conduct myself on this board, and expressed to him my absolute commitment to being a neutral and impartial advocate for the best interests of the town, which of course include the best interests of the applicant and the community in which he is a developer. So that's it.
All right, thank you. The draft agenda has then been approved unanimously. We'll move on to item number 3 in the agenda. Public comments. Seeing that we do not have anybody in our attendance, there will be no public comments. For the edification of those watching this on YouTube, this is a special meeting that's been called specifically to discuss the Planning Board's review of our UDO, our Unified Development Ordinances, and we're reviewing them, updating them with the assistance under contract of the Council of Governments, West McLeod. Thank you for joining us. This is our 7th meeting on this subject, and we're quite a ways along. We're going to resume today on Article 13, Section 13.2, Final Plat, and we will now proceed. We've all been given an initial, as we have for each meeting, an initial outline form from Wes, from the COG, in order of our various sections. But Section 13.2 Final Plat, and COG suggested we consider approval of the final plats of a certain size. Wes, did you have anything specific regarding size that you wanted to suggest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to, I think, unless I'm mistaken, I think we left off at the last item above 13.02 regarding whether or not how to handle private streets. Is there a, continue to allow them no restrictions whatsoever, continue to allow them only in developments of a certain size, or, make everything public? I think that we left it with that as an item when we left in June.
And this is 13.1.
It's at the very end of 13.01. There's mention of
Sidewalk.
private
Yeah,
streets.
paragraph 11.
And so are
I
you
thought
fine?
we left it as we're going to no longer have private roads.
Okay.
But I guess we could have a discussion on whether we're going to allow them in minor subdivisions.
Okay. Yeah.
Certainly, I think it was clear that in major subdivisions that they were going to no longer be private. They would build them to the appropriate specifications.
Even if they're
And then-
private, they still have
The-
to.
Yes, and
the-
then
the
at
construction
the end, and then at
tolerances
the
are the
end, turn
same.
it over to the town.
Okay. That's fine.
Being brought up to the, and I guess we
Yeah,
need some rules on how to.
If I'm
Yeah,
not,
we'll write that up, but
That they bring it back to like new conditions and then whatever inspection, turn it over to the town.
Chad, what's town staff view on that?
I mean, we're fully supportive. I've had conversations with Dustin Graham and Lisa about this. We're fully supportive. I think that with Mr. Labruno's point, is that yes, we talked about this, turning it over, making them do no more private, but do public. And at some point, and we didn't define that, Wes, but we've got to do at some point, be definitive about when they have to have this complete by a certain phase or timeline in their
put that-
project.
we
So you're
can
not
take-
talking about the size of the subdivision, you're talking about a timing for when it would be turned over?
Yes, so by phase 3 or by X number of homes,
Yeah, would you
or
do it by
some
like the percentage of homes that have been completed?
percentages,
80% or
phases,
something?
or
So, let's answer the first question, which I think we have. Is everyone of consensus? Now, you have not gotten, and we're getting ready to talk about the distinction between a minor and major, but and you're going to get a draft today that we go ahead and set that, at least initially, as a 20 lot threshold. That may change, but you'll get a draft today that anything 19 and under is minor, anything 20 and over is major. That's where we're starting. So if, from Mr. Labruno's point, if we make that distinction, it would mean that anything that cumulative 20 or more lots would be required to dedicate the streets to the town. Is that where we want to start? Are we good with that?
Or all.
Or all. The only thing I would add is that you may want to consider that if we're talking a 4 lot division or something like that, an allowance for a private access easement or something to that effect, so that you're not triggering the full blown 50-foot right of way and so on and so forth. Now, no one could add on to that, but we'll just, it could be all. But
The fear I have with that, make
ahead.
a statement and then we'll come right to
Sure.
you, Sybil. The fear I have with that is that, I'll be frank, golf courses, to have private, and I call them driveways, that access a number of homes is I think dangerous. With that
for
being
fire,
said,
yeah.
That is so
Civil.
funny because I'm thinking of that community on the island, on the backside of on the waterway,
Riverside.
and they call
Riverside
that a driveway.
Well, that's different though. You're exactly right, but it was a court decision by a judge that was going to be allowed that way.
Mhm.
Palm Cove also is a private road, which is really a driveway
Yeah,
that accommodates those dozen lots that are in there.
but and so there's no way we can
That cannot be retroactively changed.
No,
unless-
I understand
Okay.
that, but is there a way we can keep that type of thing from happening?
That's correct. And that's what we're talking about right now. You
Okay.
could say everything is got to be dedicated to the public and designed to a certain
Okay.
degree.
Chad?
My experience, the only time that would come into a situation, and we don't have a lot of these, is when you get like to big family tracks and all of a sudden they have a gravel driveway down the side of their road or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're making them put a 50-foot access easement in there along with 3 inches of asphalt and a barrier and full asphalt road. But again, we don't have a lot of that here in Sunset Beach. So
And for the long term, I mean, you got, when we're thinking about this, it's sometimes hard to not think in the short term, but over the long term, I typically feel that that's the best direction. There
Because
may
we
be
could always apply for a variance.
Yeah.
Sure, or it can be changed. Someone can amend the ordinance in the future for whatever reason. But yes, and then remember, in the ETJ, you're still going to have to allow private streets because that's county jurisdiction. Town is not going to take ownership in there. But sounds like everywhere in the corporate limits, we're going to go ahead and move to public then, regardless if it's major or minor. Thank you. That's
Okay.
I got
Okay.
just one question, but in ETJ, they're not required to build to the same standard?
they have to build to the same standard, but the
But-
town won't
but-
take ownership of them.
Can they? I mean, can the developers, is there then a mechanism for, say they're in ETJ?
Yep.
And they got a 40 lot
Mhm.
development, but they would prefer or decide to build it to spec and then turn it over to the town. Is
The
there a
ta-
mechanism to do
The
that?
town would have to voluntarily annex the entire
They
subdivision.
would have to annex first to bring it into the corporate limits.
And-
Okay.
Because we are getting ready to redo the roads in our neighborhood, which is ETJ. Does the county require that we do them to code?
The county owns, in North Carolina, counties do not own roads, or if you're in a county jurisdiction, not in a corporate limits, your road's either private or owned by DOT. And so in your instance, you're private, you can sort of do whatever you want.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But can the private road transfer to the NCDOT?
As long as it's built to
Yes, in
SCD.
very limited instances, but they're not going to take over, a small.
Okay.
The DOT doesn't want that.
They don't.
It doesn't fit their model.
Yeah, it's
Right.
got to be a big,
Okay.
like if Angel's
that makes
Trace, for
sense.
example,
That makes
was.
Now, in terms of this issue with the potential driveway / private road, is there a mechanism that would allow someone to say, okay, I've got, a 4-lot family dwelling that requires some egress, rather than hit them up for the full requirement? Can we build in a process that says, okay, you need to submit an application to,
There is a process, it's the Board of Adjustment for variance on I believe that's true. And
Yeah.
so it's site specific, it's designed, Board of Adjustment looks at exactly what they want to do and where they want to do it,
okay,
makes a ruling on it.
all right.
Yeah, there's Board of Adjustment, and then we can consider. Staff will look, and Public Works look at design criteria. If there's, for example, on a 4-lot or if we say 5 or fewer lots, we want to allow a 30-foot right of way, but they still build, rather than a 50-foot right of way, less pavement, things like that. So the cost is not as exorbitant. They still going to have to require to bring it into the town, but we'll look at that. I think that's sort of what you're getting at.
Yeah, because taking it to the Board of Adjustments is a somewhat onerous process. I'm wondering if there's a way to accomplish the same thing, but keep it either with staff or with the police department, the fire department. They can take a look at this and say, no, this doesn't constitute a danger in terms of emergency services. And in a case like that, then staff would be allowed to.
Yeah, the key is making sure that it's compliant with fire code, making sure that.
Right.
But I think it is important to have everything be public. Sounds like you guys are on the same
Yes.
page, so that's what we'll.
You're going to come up with something.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I have one question. Now, this transfer from private to public, I know in my community, transfer was made, the road was repaved. Lovely.
To get it up to standards.
Get it up to standard. Unfortunately, the repaving of the road created huge stormwater issues. So now there are homes in my neighborhood that when it rains, you have a pond in your driveway that's maybe 6 inches deep. What mechanism can we create that says, okay, when we insert this new road, when we've taken it over, we may not have the ability to understand what impact it's had on.
This is what we're talking about here. Moving forward is a new development. Not
Okay.
There's procedures for older roads that need to be brought in. That's a different thing. We're talking about
Okay.
new development.
All right.
And Richard, you bring up a good point too, because it isn't just when roads are being transferred from private to public. Every time through our Pell grants,
Pal grants.
Powell,
Powell,
Yeah.
that we repave or put an overlay on any of our streets that are owned by the town,
Yeah.
it has to be thought out because it creates the exact same drainage concerns that you just brought out. But it isn't just when it's
Got it.
private to public. It's every time we lay asphalt down
but I think
to update and maintain a road.
But I think the problem he's describing is because of the private road thing in the first place. If you're designing a development and you know that road's going to be public, it's part of your stormwater plan, you know your elevations, you know your grade, you know your thicknesses of your asphalt. When you just throw a private road down, nobody cares. And then when you come and put a cap on it to make it be the 3 inches or whatever we require, I believe, will avoid those types of problems 20 years from now, because any new development, it will be designed properly that it's going to be a public road.
Isn't that looked at by the county when they look at a stormwater plan for a group of homes?
It's a state.
It's a state.
Okay.
The county does look to make sure that there's been a state issued permit.
And they look at gradients,
They do. I mean,
or don't they?
We can go down a rabbit hole on stormwater. And we probably really shouldn't, but the state has a minimum standard, period, and so some jurisdictions have an additional step of oversight where they hire a third party engineer to review to make sure that yes, you're compliant with state stormwater, but also you're not going to create excessive ponding, et cetera, whatever it may be. Because the folks at the state, they're up to their ears in these things. So if it complies, they're that's it.
Yeah. Well, the issue is the road. I think the gradient and all that stuff can comply, but then you place a slab asphalt on it, and that slab asphalt tends to have a little bit of a peak in the middle. And so what happens is the runoff runs off to what's almost now a created gully, right? Now, in my situation, if there's enough rain, it will come over that gully and then drain lovely, perfectly. But in the meantime, you've got a huge 50-foot diameter pond in the middle of the road in 2 or 3 sections of the development. So
We do live.
my question is there a mechanism to say, okay, you guys have to come back and fix this once it's done?
Once it comes into the town system, then it would be part of the ongoing capital improvement projects that that the stormwater department has.
And a lot of times it's maintaining ditches along property lines and storm ditches in the street, which people tend to fill in.
Yeah,
Correct.
So it's a problem that's exasperated by people actually living there for a number of years before the overlay is in fact put on the street.
yeah.
But we positively crown all roads. We do that for safety purposes. We don't want water on the road, so we want it to go to
exactly.
the sides.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Can I go to 13.2 again?
Yes,
And
thank you. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That was a
Yeah.
very important
Yeah.
thing that you brought up here.
Okay. Can we just recap what we agreed to on 13.1? I think I know, but
All public streets.
got it. Okay.
We were talking about a certain size of a final plat for staff approval.
Yes.
Is there a recommendation?
So in discussion with staff, staff is, we've initially said it is all final plats will be responsibility of staff. That will be in your draft. Again, once we get to your draft, we can talk about it again. I needed to keep moving on before we got to this, so.
So you don't have a conclusion. You just say, let's visit this.
Yes, it will be in here, and that's the way it's handled in a lot of jurisdictions. You guys will be responsible for the major subdivision preliminary plats, make sure infrastructure is whatever, this is how things are going to go, trees, etc. Once they do everything and they want to get it recorded, whenever it is 2 years later, they'll come in and staff will sign off.
And you're thinking already of revising the major to 20 or more.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Okay. Gotcha.
So the proposal is that planning board doesn't look at finals
That's correct.
ever, no matter size or,
That is as
unless staff decides.
well.
They always can, right?
Sure, that is what you will get in the draft material today. That is draft. So if as when we review that, when we get to that, if this board feels like, we would prefer to have a final plat come to us, then absolutely that
I'm
can
a
be
little
modified.
leery of taking that away. I don't think we have enough of them that it's overburdensome, and we're running out of land at some point.
Okay.
So I guess I'll put it in my mind, but I'm a little skeptical at the moment. But
Okay.
that doesn't mean
Yeah,
I won't reconsider. At the moment, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up of a little bit of skepticism that we don't get a last look.
Sure.
It doesn't seem like the finals take that long,
This group does.
but I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
I,
So-
I don't know what the rest of people think.
I kind
That's fine.
I
That's
kinda
fine.
share-
It's
I share Ron's hair on the back of my neck, but
Okay.
let's explore it in the draft.
Okay. And
What about-
it
what about you guys?
I'm fine. It makes perfect sense. It does.
So-
So I always want to keep an eye.
We have another chance to look at it too. So it's
okay.
Well, I think the
Same thing I'm thinking is, at what point, if we're hiring these people to do these jobs, when are we going to accept that they can do them? But we've got to second guess them on everything, and we don't even have the experience they have. I just
Yeah.
think it's overkill.
I guess the slight difference I see is the public. We're public,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
it comes down to
right?
you look at it on the preliminary plat level, everything in the details on the preliminary plat. As long as the final plat
matches.
matches the preliminary, it's just a formality. So that is my wish. That is staff's wish that all final plats be reviewed by staff. It helps, especially with the submittal process, the streamline process, and not trying to squeeze something in quicker. It's a lot that goes into preparing everything and making sure everything's submittal within a deadline to make sure an applicant can get it in here to you guys on time. So preliminaries are different, but final plats are, as long as it matches. And ultimately it comes down, you got to trust staff to be able to say, hey, if it doesn't match, you've got to go back to the planning board.
All
So
right. Unless somebody has gas with that.
Yeah. So my understanding, Chad, is that the planning board would review the preliminary plat
Yes.
outline
Always.
always, so that this final plat approval, the only way the applicant could get final plat approval is if there is absolutely no divergence between the preliminary and the final.
Correct.
Yeah, that's
And I agree. I really agree. However, that being said, I even like us to be in earlier, and that's why I've said several times in public session about the technical review committee at least having a representative of one or two of the planning board, so that we get an opportunity up front to become familiar with things, so that we can put input. Once the preliminary plat has been approved, as long as they're conforming with that, there's not a lot we can do up here anyway, as long as they comply. So,
And the key part of the TRC for the final plat is making sure that Public Works and the other, county is all on board with the infrastructure that goes in. I mean, that's the crux of the final plat, making sure that the road has been properly designed, etc.
So again, help me understand. So in terms of a preliminary plat, some of these issues may not have been addressed. So in a hypothetical case, we've approved a preliminary plat. A change has to be made based on some issue. Now that would have to come back
Yes.
based on the fact that, oops, stormwater requires that this plat can't be here, it's got to be there. Okay.
In the next section, can we move on? Is that
Yeah,
all right for
sure.
everybody?
No, this is good.
1303, we're talking about the term sidewalks has been mentioned, making it eligible for a bond. I know that we do pavements and there's other things that we do. We allow the developer, the contractor, to perform their function without damaging new stuff that they put in, and that's really the purpose of it. So they can put it in later, but we want a bond to secure the fact that it's going to be installed. With regard to sidewalks, Chad, is there an argument, I guess, to be made where sidewalks would be in the developer's way?
Yes. I mean, we already allow performance guarantees for sidewalks.
All right, well then,
It's just not explicitly.
Correct.
It
Okay.
says minor improvements.
okay.
The
The reason why that is because especially if you go look on Crooked Gully, if you install the sidewalk beforehand, you have all that back and forth over it, you damage it. And,
Well,
then-
you're limited then to the driveway curb cut.
That
for
too.
Getting access to the.
and
to the
therefore
home.
you damage that sidewalk.
If
and
you
then
think
all
it's
of a-
important, then
Yeah, it's
that
important.
convinces me, but
Yep.
I just wanted to have a reason. Anybody good with that?
Good.
Recording the plat, no changes. 13.4, recommended by COG. Number 1305, pedestrian crosswalk requirements. And I guess what we're really talking about is painted areas to get to public mailbox kiosks and to swimming pool facilities and things like that. Golf course, cart paths.
Well, you're just recommending that this be moved, right?
yes. 'Cause
So-
that wouldn't be on the final plat.
So we're still,
you could still have it, but that needs to be on the preliminary
Design
plat.
So, and give you an example, when I go out there and look at a subdivision to be approved on the ground before it comes to y'all, I go out there with the preliminary plat to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be according to that, such as truncated domes, pedestrian crosswalks, fire hydrants, and stuff like that. Well, fire hydrants would be on the scope of the police department or fire department, but you get what I'm saying.
Okay. 13.6. I have some comments on that, and I don't want to belabor it with tree preservation, but there is a big part of it for standards of approval. I believe that in 1306, C as in Charlie, that we need more teeth in. I believe that developers need to have a reason to cut a heritage tree down, and not just the fact that they can seek to retain as many trees as practical. You know, to have it that open-ended, I think just basically says you can cut all the trees down.
That is one of the biggest complaints I hear about these all of this new development, is that they're just coming in and clear cutting it.
And we could all see, like right behind me where we put the town parking lot in, it's obvious that when you're putting something in like a parking lot with its drainage and everything else, that there's requirements for landscaping as a part of that project. Now, I don't think any of us like the fact that they took, 50 trees down and they put, 20 trees up that are of much smaller size. But the practicality is if you're going to have a parking lot in a municipal environment, then that's what we're going to have. But I think there's rules that govern that. I just don't like a clause under standards of approval that just lets a developer cut down all the trees he wants as long as he can contend that it's practical.
I guess the question in my mind, in this rewrite of this UDO, are we going to redo the tree preservation part in total, or not, or we're just going to try to massage what we got. I'm a proponent of scrapping what we got completely and coming up with a new way of doing it. But if,
Me too.
if only I'm the only one, then we're just, again, are we going to massage the edges and Band-Aid a little thing here and there, or are we going to basically?
I think we had this discussion, you know, and we've had it a couple times, but I think that our goal is going to be to identify a couple of those key species, for example, a live oak, and a significant one, and prioritize that those couple trees be kept on site. But, you know, hey, some of our smaller stuff we're okay with removing, but let's figure out if you've got, depending on the size of the site, three or four, you know, 20-inch live oaks. I'm not talking about pines or whatever. Then let's figure out how to keep those on site. If you want to take the rest of it, that's fine. But rather than we want to keep a bunch of 8-inch trees. Let's allow them to be able to grade their site and then keep a couple of those large trees. And that's the discussion that we've had or ended last time, in which case that would be the same thing for subdivision moving forward.
But going to what Ron just said, that really is a rewrite.
Yes.
And if, as long as you're going in that direction, I think that would probably satisfy the majority of the planning board here.
Well, my concern is that, and I understand about the quote unquote heritage trees, is that there is a general ambience that's created by maintaining a certain number of non-heritage trees in an area.
Mm-hmm.
This is I mean, the perfect example is Sea Trail. Okay, you've had developments in Sea Trail that have done a very good job of preserving not only heritage trees, but non-heritage trees in a way that support a general sense of modeled shading that has a lot of benefits, both environmentally.
And look, I understand all that. We've had that discussion, but remember, a lot of that development also occurred before the stormwater rules that are in place now that require almost carte blanche regrading of the site.
Yes.
And so, you know,
But so maybe that's what we've been, or at least I've heard before. What does the state rule says they have to regrade, even if there's a
certain amount of
we have to regrade the site, even when there's no stormwater in that area?
So they have to put in a stormwater system that is compliant, and if they're disturbing more than an acre or putting more than 10,000 square foot of impervious, then they do have to have a compliant stormwater system. And for now, until the state modifies their coastal stormwater rules, their system basically is to collect it all on the site and move it to one location. And because of that, what I believe is a good path forward is saying, hey, look, you got a couple of these spots. We need to maintain that grade on these spots to protect those large trees. You need to take everything else out, fine, whatever, or try to figure out that balance. But this thing where you're keeping trees all throughout the site, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do so.
I think Richard brought up a good point about the ambience and benefit of even pine trees.
Yep.
And it used to be because lots were larger
Mm-hmm.
that we were able to do that. It is difficult, more difficult when we're talking about like a development like the sanctuary, which is being done by a developer, where ambience is one positive attribute, but construction costs and business acumen, all of that it tends to be what drives the bus. I'd like to see what you come up with. We also have Appendix C at the back here, heritage trees, which we haven't come to quite yet. Maybe we'll come to it later today or next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can provide a lot of benefit as we re-establish what is a heritage tree and establish that.
Yeah.
Okay, being the devil's advocate here, sorry.
That's
We
what-
are
that's
so
what makes us
concerned
work
about these heritage trees and all of these trees. And I love trees. You can look in my yard and tell I love trees. But the thing is, we can cut them all down to put in sidewalks. You know, we've got to have a road to get to a house, but we don't have to have sidewalks, but we can take down heritage trees. Well, they're going to plant some more. Well, they're going to plant some more that are going to break up the sidewalk. I mean, this is just, it's like, it's getting into a ball of mess.
Well, we have a requirement for sidewalks in certain size communities, but not in all
Why?
communities.
Is that
Well,
code?
because of public access, because of,
Hey, I don't have any sidewalks in my neighborhood,
but
you know?
but you don't have a mailbox kiosk for everybody in your neighborhood to have to go to. There's different,
And how many communities in our area have kiosks?
the newer ones are all having them.
They're all going to have it.
I
Yeah.
think they should. They
Well-
should be on the island, but they're not.
Like,
Well,
well,
Postal Service has changed its rules in terms of where they will allow post office boxes to be placed, and that creates some difficulty in terms of what you're discussing. So, and the other thing, and I'm not an arborist, but there are species of trees whose nature is roots go down, not sideways, and you hope that they have the foresight to.
But are they indigenous? And how many are indigenous? And what size do those trees get to be? It just keeps going and going and going. I think we need to do the best we can and move on. And
Well,
I mean, we
but
have
Section C
discussed
is gonna help
trees
us with that, too.
forever. We
Yeah.
discussed trees 10 years ago. We are still discussing.
I would say it is the most major issue that I get approached with when I say I'm on the planning board. Why are they cutting down all the trees? What can you do about cutting down?
Wes
all the
hears that
trees?
at every community he deals
I
with.
do.
too.
I know. I'm actually pretty close to calling the legislature and said, you know what, that preemption on on us regulating trees, let's put it in place because I can't take it anymore. I say that in jest, but it's
but
it,
like,
you know.
well, to me, I'm back to the first question. As a board, are we going to
Yes, we are.
Band-Aid what we got
Rewrite.
and hope for the
Rewrite.
best,
Rewrite.
or are we going to take a whole second look at this?
There'll be similar
So
framework.
that every little section, like Pete just came up with this paragraph C, every section that talks about trees either has to be changed or direct to another code that says, you know, because we have it like scattered all over the place.
There's going to be an overarching tree
So I
frame.
think that's the decision I'd like to hear today. Are we just going to patch it up, or are we going to start from scratch?
I think we've come to this
That was
conclusion already. We're going to try to move towards protecting the large trees and then have a greater allowance for removal of some of the smaller ones and trying to regulate everything that's 8
I
inches
think
or
Ron's
more.
asking a different question, and I appreciate what you're saying. We are either going to say we're going to rewrite the entire code in terms of the issue of trees.
But Wes is rewriting it by what he
Yeah.
just said.
Yeah, well,
he's,
that
he's
to me
starting
is-
from a basis,
Yeah.
and all of these other things are going to disappear.
Right.
Correct.
So is it the sentiment of the board that we want to rewrite this or Band-Aid it? I would say rewrite.
What do you think?
Rewrite.
Sure.
I mean, we've been doing, up north, they've been doing protecting trees a certain diameter for years. I'm just amazed. Now, finally, it's coming down to the south. So
Yeah.
it might hinder some lots that all of a sudden you get a 3-foot diameter tree. It might not be buildable, but I think you need to preserve trees.
Yeah, but and I know it can be somewhat cumbersome, but we have variance provisions, even if the tree is right in the center of your lot. It's because we need to allow people to develop their properties.
But I think, to me, the key
That's what we're
thing,
talking about, major developments.
Well, true.
Yeah.
the key thing I think is if it's there, things can be figured out
Yes.
as long as it's upfront and advanced. I mean, if you're looking at a site and you know what the rules are on the trees, it's part of your plat design part, you know. If you know in your mind, I can just clear cut the whole damn 20 acres and start with a nice square and then lay out whatever I want, fine. But if you know you got some restrictions and you know where they're at,
Start with a tree plan.
right, start
Yeah.
with the tree plan and then design around it. I mean, I design engineer my whole life, so the rules you're given up front on a project tell you how you got to design something. If you got to design
Can there be some kind of wording that we can at least start off as a premise that a tree survey is going to be
Absolutely.
Prepared.
Tree survey will be prepared.
on certain size?
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be very similar things about having a tree survey, a tree plan, But rather than, as I've said, a bunch of the medium trees, we're trying to
Come back with that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I think that would be the pleasure of the board to
Okay.
start over again
Yeah.
with that as
Okay.
a basis to look
Okay.
at.
Great.
13, I'm sorry.
I said great.
1307 fees. Yeah. Why do we have a section that says refer to section 2.16? It's number 1308. I had no comments with it. We've beaten signs up to no intent, to no degree. 1309, penalty for transferring lots. I would see no change. When we get into the planned residential development section, part 2 of Article 13, I think there probably is, I think we're unclear. I am unclear as to what a planned residential development, a PRD, really is.
Can I just? I want to ask Wes something. There is no incentive unless we are creating an incentive for the PRD. Is there a reason why we're even keeping this process?
No, I've recommended, frankly, to remove this, and in your, which I will get to when I hand out your material today, you will have a first draft of a conditional zoning language, which would replace this, and so that we'd be following a formal process that a lot of jurisdictions around us use when somebody wants to have some sort of creative residential subdivision proposal.
But to answer your question, Pete, in some jurisdictions you have PRD, which is a plan, or PUD.
I mean, I've read this
Yep.
10 times. And
there's also an incentive to go down this route.
well, you're giving a developer, just so I know, you're giving a developer at least some options to come to you with an overall plan so you can look at it, so you're not just classifying it as a subdivision.
Correct. But there's really no incentive to go down this route to an extent. For example, in past municipalities that I've worked in, we allowed them, if you went down the PRD process or the PUD process and you both had county and water or municipality or public water and sewer hookups, you could reduce your lot size from, let's say, 10,000 or 9,000 down to 7,500. So you got a little bit more density out of it, but we don't have that. There's no reason to have this in here.
So what I guess we're entertaining right now is eliminating part 2.
Yes.
That's correct. And
go to a conditional zoning
yes.
That's
type
correct.
scenario,
Draft.
which we talked about early on, and maybe a new explanation again would be helpful. But our initial impression was that sounded better. So,
And I have a question. In terms of the change in this process, does it inhibit dissemination to the public of?
For conditional zoning,
Yeah.
there is much more public involvement. And I'll tell you this, for your standpoint,
Right.
someone proposes a conditional zoning, say, subdivision, they are required to hold a public input meeting out in the community, responsibility of the developer, the applicant, face to face with that community before it even gets to this board.
They've got to sell it first.
That's correct. And
Conditional
so,
zoning
yeah.
is the most strenuous process a town can put on a developer.
And how do we deal with that in the UDO?
It will be summarized.
You've got it drafted in your homework for today.
So basically, the applicant will have to summarize how those meetings went to me. That will be required to be submitted to the planning board and then town council.
Anybody have
would there
any-
likewise be, other than that the guy thinks it's the greatest idea on earth, and any incentives like Chad was talking about to go that way?
Yes.
Or it's just that his idea, he thinks the idea is the greatest thing?
Well,
Or is there going to be also tied in either fees or
so
consolidation of the speed up of the process or whatever
you
included?
got to remember that that a developer is not going to necessarily invest time and money on some idea that they don't think is has some legitimate chance of getting approved. And so they're going to come in, and maybe they do have a little bit more dense project, but than would otherwise permitted. But they're going to say, instead of retaining 1.5 inches of stormwater, we're going to retain 3 inches, and instead of keeping all 25-inch trees, we're going to keep 20-inch trees or whatever it is. Does that, if that makes sense? And those conditions and that discussion is legal as part of this process and can happen at all the various stages.
So in that community meeting, if he makes an adjustment to his plan, that's legally binding?
Well, he would say, you guys don't like that I have 7,500 square foot lots, so I'm going to move them to 8,500 when it gets to this board. If this board still doesn't like 8,500 and you want 9,000, you could recommend to town council that they be 9,000 square foot, and then it gets to town council, and whatever gets approved at town council is what is officially.
Well, I'm more concerned that it goes the other way. Oh, community meeting, yep, 8,500. Now he comes here in the empty auditorium. He comes back to 7,500.
Well, if you don't, if you agree that 7,500 is fine, that's okay. But if you want it to be at 8,500, then.
But we would strongly look at what the input was from the community during that whole initial selling process.
That's correct.
So-
By what process would we get that information? I mean, we're not going to be at the community meeting necessarily. Are we going to get a summary of?
It's all in this material, but yes, you get a summary.
Okay, great.
On part 3 here, which also has to do with the PRD, at least the way I read it, it does. What got my attention is addressing impacts on towns. This is F on 13.13. And I'll use the term traffic impact analysis. Chad, is there a way that we can, as a planning board, can legitimately require that a traffic impact analysis be done? Let's say the technical review committee does not require it or does not address it, and it comes to us. I think that that's an extremely important piece of information for us to be able to digest before we approve or not a large subdivision. Is it addressed anywhere? And if we eliminate section 13.13, are we in fact removing the requirement for them providing a
No.
report addressing the
No,
impacts on
because
the
if you
town?
go back and look at the TRC provisions, I think in Article 3 or 4,
I don't know the TRC.
it
provisions.
allows me to bring in outside agencies or agencies deemed by UDO administrator.
If you all want a TIA requirement, and this is not necessarily something that I think we've discussed, you can require one for anything that would collectively generate over 500 or more trips. That's a common provision that we have in several
In the
of our.
preliminary plat?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So if that's something that you want to consider. Now, I do not like how this is worded under F.
Yeah, I don't
It's
either.
not objective.
Yeah.
I think it's.
It's subject.
Well,
Yeah.
second to trees, the next biggest complaint's always traffic, right?
Yeah.
So I would think that would be certainly a way I would be
Okay.
like to go is
But-
get that traffic information certainly and study done up front early as possible.
Well, I'd like to see some wording to bootstrap off of what you're saying. See some wording in the UDO that says that the planning board has the right, under certain circumstances, to require a traffic impact analysis.
It needs to be objective. So, you can't, Bob, we need your development to do a TIA, but Sue,
Not-
you don't have to.
Can it just be
So-
all major subdivisions?
It could, but that is way excessive.
Well, a traffic impact analysis can be costly. It takes a lot of time.
Absolutely.
It's
How much?
A lot. I would not do it for anything. I would recommend what communities that have them beyond NCDOT requirement. Typically, the threshold is a 500 trip threshold
per day.
per day, or peak hour, I believe is what it is. But I can look at that and I can
Okay.
check.
What does the rest of the board think on traffic impact analysis? I think we have an obligation with development to, we represent the public.
Do you
Yeah.
know, Wes, do you know what DOT,
I'd have to look on what DOT
what
is.
their
I don't
minimum
recall off
or
the top of my head.
Because one of the things I've noticed around here is you have these situations the sanctuary entrance in the post office is a perfect example. Highly trafficked road. The sanctuary's entrance to the road is here. Post office entry is here. Okay?
Sanctuary did a TIA.
What?
Sanctuary did a TIA.
And they put a decel lane in there too.
Yep.
That's,
Yeah, and that's going to help. But in a perfect world, it should be like this. So you have a four-way stop where everybody gets to see who's coming out of what intersection. I mean, if we're building this from ground up, I don't see what, in terms of these minor tweaks.
I'll tend to agree with you, but we, as a town, have no jurisdiction over that because it is a DOT road.
Well, is the approach from I'm not
Remember-
concerned about 904. I'm concerned about the sanctuary built that road out to 904.
Mhm.
We have no way of saying, hey, why don't you move that 20 feet?
No, because it's a permit, it's a driveway access permit issued by DOT.
State road.
So therefore, they approve where it goes in and goes out. That's what
Well,
happens.
where in this process it may be as simple as a request. It says, hey, don't you think it would be a better idea if?
You guys, you have to remember that you're not transportation engineers,
Right.
so you cannot micromanage all of this process. You will get sued into oblivion. So you guys got to understand the framework with what people have. There are a certain amount of property rights that are afforded to people. They can develop their property. So I know that's hard to understand. And that's why
well,
these
it's not
things
hard to
are
understand. It's hard to
so
accept.
painful. It's hard to accept,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'm concerned that somebody's going to sue you because they got T-boned coming out of the post office.
well,
Yeah,
they,
it's
they,
different.
they
Not your
won't sue the
problem.
town.
It's,
And
it's a state road.
yeah,
It's a road.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Well, yeah.
All
Well, I
right.
guess where I'm at is kind of, I think we
you can require an objective TIA.
move the impact studies, and especially traffic, up front
Right.
where we can insist on it. I'd like to certainly think about the criteria you're talking about. I hear the number you're throwing out, but that one seems to be a calculation from the developer. I like to see how that's the 500 trips
It's
per
based
peak.
on- It's based on
Is there-
ITE, and then
Yeah.
if there's a book, a trip generation manual that a certified engineer will attest that either this project does not create 500 peak hour trips or it does. And if they say under seal that it doesn't, fine, you can hire the town can hire their own engineer
we
to
need
So
to
if
then
that-
have a better definition or a definition for a traffic impact analysis as to what constitutes one, an acceptable one.
yes, there will yeah.
Okay.
If you're going to put one in here, we'll
So,
put standard.
I guess
language.
I'm not familiar with it. So, but as long as it's a hard rule of how they calculate that,
It is fact based. Yes.
fact-based rule signed by a PE, since I am
Yes.
one,
Yes.
that putting his license on the line, then
It's
I'm fine
not
with
some
that.
guy that says whatever. I think that there's
Right.
500.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
because then I would say let's find something simpler like number of residences. If it's 20 is not the number and it's
There's
50 or something, then we set it
there's
because
standard
we're
procedures for how these.
unambiguous.
Yes. It's unambiguous.
So something like the sanctuary would be required, but something of a smaller scale wouldn't.
It would depend if the threshold is 500, whatever the 500.
Depends on what the book says
Yeah.
by the size of the subdivision as to how many bedrooms and cars.
Yes.
There is a formula.
There's a
for it.
Senate,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, as we move on to Part 4 design standards, that isn't certainly just for PRDs, it's for subdivisions. I did not really have any comments on Part 4, sections 1321 to 1326, other than the ones that Wes had put out, where he's removing one and confirming planning board approval of another.
And
The
13,
standard, Wes, with the state is only 15-year storm water management, a non-flood area.
I think that the state, you're talking about stormwater.
Stormwater management.
Stormwater is you have to capture 1.5 inches of
So that's how they.
1.5 inches
Based upon
yeah.
your impervious area.
Correct. Yeah. So, and again, that's where you're going to get this conditional zoning in here, but that's where proposals for conditional zoning that are happening in the county, when they do these, they're asking for 3 inches or 2.5 inches or things like that outside of the
Well,
minimum
but 3
standards.
inches, be a 30-year storm, I guess, if you do the math.
I'm not sure. I don't think it works like that, unfortunately.
On 13.2.6,
hmm
I just, which seems simple, but are we, maybe I just don't understand your description. This section says no local improvements or utilities, including water, shall be constructed until the preliminary plan. Okay. So that's just approved, but in any state or federal agencies.
Obviously, the state or federal agencies are going to give the go-ahead if they've got to do utility extensions, et cetera, or stormwater. But sometimes there will be additional detailed construction plans for their infrastructure that will come after the preliminary plat. And the way this is written in here, it would make them have to then come back again after they've already gotten their preliminary plat.
So you want to clarify it.
That should just be taken out, frankly. You guys are improving the entitlements. You can go do this development. You don't need to review their engineering specs, et cetera.
So this is, really what you're saying here,
some of that will be
remove this
addressed.
section.
Yes.
Okay.
Or
So
make
it's
sure
totally
that
be a staff
Yeah.
thing.
We're talking 13.2.6,
Yes, sir.
and this is to avoid basically them having to return.
After another agency has already approved.
Right. Okay.
Appendix A, our very favorite, well, next to trees, it's our very favorite one under definitions. Obviously, an extremely powerful part of the UDO because it defines what words mean. I believe that we're never going to finish with definitions. However, I think we've made a yeoman's attempt as we've been going through the first 13 sections of this to supplement and change and add definitions. I don't know that it makes much sense unless anybody else in the planning board wants to go through each of the definition pages. I've got copious notes all through my definitions of things that we've changed or we're going to look at or you're going to reconsider and then come back to us on. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of the definitions because it's extremely important, but I don't know that we need to go through each definition and rehash.
It's probably easier to see the new appendix.
Okay?
You know what I mean?
When we get
Going
there.
through this way is, and I wrote all over the place to the point where I didn't know where I was going either. So I think the definition section might be easier to look at a new section.
Fresh.
Right. Now, a couple points I asked earlier, which I've always had issues with, not issues with, but confusion, it is our definitions of dwellings. What's a dwelling? What's a single family? What's a duplex? I mean, it seems like it's, what's a townhouse? What's a condo? It seems like the whole thing is messy, really. You don't agree? It looks like on your face. But I mean, to me, a single family residence is a single family residence. That's one. Everything above that is multifamily attached.
It's however you define it.
Right. And then you can further break it, multifamily attached, 2 being a duplex, 3, 4, quad, large, small. It seems like we've made it quite messy in all these definitions, but maybe you think that's just the normal way of doing it.
I mean, remember, some of this you got to rely on the UDO administrator for interpretation, but yes, there's a single family detached dwelling. That's typically, it's probably what most of you all live in. And then most folks also delineate a separate duplex. And then from there, commonly, anything that's 3 or more units attached is referred to as multifamily. And then townhome will have a specific definition depending on the jurisdiction. It may be 6 or 8 units attached, and they own the land underneath it. Condo,
Does that make a difference, whether it's fee simple and they own
Yes.
the land underneath? Okay. I'll
and
continue.
and for one, it allows them to actually subdivide the land and record it. But two, from the developer standpoint, it's a lot easier to mortgage that,
Sure.
to sell that product.
Yes.
And so, and also from the owner standpoint, they also like to own the land underneath them versus being subject to, the condo model. And then the condo model is you own the walls, etc. You don't own the ground. That's the quick rundown of it, the various delineations.
So you think those different
We will
against-
make sure that they are correct.
Okay.
But that's the framework within which to work.
Like a dwelling triplex, we don't really need it necessarily.
You can if that's something that you want to allow. In some communities, they'll have a triplex and then a quadplex, and then anything, you can still define that as multifamily, but
Yeah, the determination is what's allowed on a lot. And right now, we allow what is a single family resident includes a duplex.
well, you have to look at the use table for what's allowed where.
Well, like the certain places on the island, they're not allowed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Well,
So even if it's a
and is our use table consistent with our definitions? It seems to me
That's a
we're
big
little
piece of-
gray. I
that's
don't think we're consistent. Well, maybe not enough inconsistent where it's giving anybody a problem, but since mostly we're getting single family houses, but it seems like we're not consistent in the use table and our definitions. And I mean, like we had the patio home thing we discussed a while back, like what's that? And
The use table has got to be fixed. And if
Yeah.
you fix the use table, then a lot of the other stuff will make
so
sense.
maybe that's where the problem is really there, not, and the definitions
No,
will follow.
Don't get me
accordingly.
wrong. There's problems throughout that whole entire book.
that there's a number of places, and obviously you can see all the comments that I've made in the definitions. But I think what Pete alluded to is perhaps we know that the definitions are gonna be significantly modified, and so and as we go, we'll give you new definitions when you get material. You got some with your last section. So we good? Are we?
So I
Moving
guess
on.
at some point, are we going to go through the sections and you're giving us some definitions, but at some point, when we get to the end of the sections, we'll actually have a whole new sections of definitions to look at.
You'll get a whole new Appendix A.
Right.
And actually, what we'll probably refer to it as Article 7, or I can't recall exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that, and I'm sure you'll go through this. We're in 2022. It's a little different than it was back in 2000.
Yeah.
Even something like what a definition of a family is. I mean, obviously, societal changes. Where partners are important.
Now that's a key one. And you may not think so, but and so for family here, you don't have a limitation on that actually. So some places they have a limitation on how many unrelated persons can live under one roof, but
We don't have that. We don't have that.
you don't have that. So yes, I think that as we go throughout this, as there's things that you notice, and a lot of these have been pointed out and we've put in here.
Okay.
So, is there a way to insert the word domestic partner in this?
Oh, in what?
In family.
In
A
family?
definition. There are several things that talk about renters and and things like that, where the term family or it comes into play. I can't think of them right now, but I think there's 2 or 3 sections within our UDO that require certain things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have a new definition of golf course, champion golf
Yes.
course. So that's pretty cool.
So we're writing that into the family definition, or is this?
I think Wes has it written down as just update.
Yes.
And he'll look at that.
Okay.
And because you don't want to put something in there where you're going to get sued either. Or not put something in there and get sued, or put something in there and not get sued. So
Well, we have a definition of heritage trees under definitions that lists a whole bunch of trees. You know, that's duplicative. We can reference heritage trees in the various UDO articles, and then we have a section that establishes what the heritage trees are that, you know, you're going to work on.
I mean, my first proposal on that is get rid of that name and call it a regulated tree.
Okay.
And then
So-
you can define what the regulated trees are.
so we're going to move.
Heritage kind of.
We're going to move
the
up in-
heritage tree designation does bring in. I mean, there
Brings in an emotional response.
Well, that not only that, but it is a codified definition. So, I mean, I get where we're going here. I mean, but heritage tree does have some legal standing in terms of the definition as it floats upstream.
If we've agreed to look at definitions as fresh, then we can move on to Appendix B and streetscape guidelines.
Streetscape, for the benefit of those watching by YouTube, really has to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff or Wes, has to do with our multi-use district, our MUD district, which is Food Lion, all the way down to Artesia Village and the planetarium and that whole area, which is subdivided into like 5 different groups of communities within that MUD district.
And I think, if I can, Mr. Chair, we need to listen. Let's turn it over to Wes to see where he wants to go with this, because the experts just how he wants to lay this out.
Be my contention that a separate section for this is probably not.
Yeah, Wes.
needed.
I mean, again, my recommendation would be listen to Wes, have a short conversation on it, and ultimately look at this fresh as well. Wes.
Yes, I mean, I think that this needs to be rolled into a zoning district, and for whatever reason, I don't know how this provisions have continued
So
to
this
be.
would be in section 6.
It'd be in Article 3, but it would be
Okay.
it would be along with the other zoning districts.
Okay, all right.
But the town cannot be reliant on a separate architectural review board to first say that the architectural review board has to approve this before the town can approve it. That cannot happen. If a property owner has a feud with that ARB and Chad tells them, sorry, I can't issue the permit until the ARB lets you, that's grounds for probably some serious liability on behalf of the town. The ARB needs to do whatever the ARB is going to do, and period. And then the town needs to regulate height, setback, uses. Let them do what other HOA does in other places.
For clarity, the Architectural Review Board is not a town board. It
That's
is
right.
totally independent of our municipality.
Correct.
It has to do with the developer and the way that development is structured.
Yes. Now, does that mean that Chad doesn't correspond and make sure that things are, understand what their, things are going on over there? No, he's in partnership with them and understands the various aspects. But you cannot have regulations based on another outside entity.
But we can have regulations.
You can have your own
Can
regulations.
we have regulations in spite of the outside entity?
Yes.
Yes, you
Okay.
can.
And that's
So-
where we've got to move to. Because
So
right
it seems
now,
like all these things should have one set of regulations.
yes.
And you do have design standards, and we've talked about them already, and you've got the overlay district as well. And I think that I'd have to go back to what my notes were, but I think that the goal was to expand those to to all non-residential development throughout the town.
The thing that can be confusing this, you see streetscape guideline, this is not to be confused with the corridor, the overlay
Right,
district.
it's not the overlay district.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a very poor title for this Appendix B.
Yes, it's misleading.
Yeah.
So in other words, if we have design standards, including visual design standards, it can be applied to these areas just the same as they would apply to any other area.
Any
Now-
other zoning district, yes.
That's
Right.
correct.
Now, if it conflicts with the
HOA.
HOA, it's
So ultimately, we should be able to issue a permit regardless of how the HOA feels.
Right.
If it's then a problem of getting an HOA permit, that becomes a problem between the applicant and the HOA, not a problem with the applicant and the town. Right now, if they can't get a permit from the HOA, it is a problem with the applicant in the town because our standards are limited to what they are, and I have to go off of what the architectural ARB is. And
That's not the way.
that's
So we can impose
but a
more
hierarchy should be
stringent.
the town on top, right?
so, yeah.
We can impose more stringent requirements on the mud district.
Mhm.
Let's say it had to do with treescapes or something like
The
that.
plan right now is for Wes and I at some point to sit down with the architectural review board and come up with some kind of standards to where they are matched or not more restrictive, I guess, than what they are right now, and still let them be the more restrictive. But it's got to be some kind of guidelines where they can get a permit for a town, then ultimately the ARB can determine if it fits in their box or not, and not the other way around.
So these are architectural review boards for specific developments, communities.
Only in the mixed use district. So think about it right now. You live in Sea Trail. You want to build a house, you want to build an accessory structure.
Right,
You come get a permit from me. I don't care what color you paint it.
right,
Architectural Review Board does.
does. Well, this is complicated by the fact that the declarants are not bound by the architectural review board. They can do anything they want.
We're talking about
An individual
we're
homeowner.
talking about.
Yeah, I'm just
something
using that
different.
as an example.
We're talking about So in any case, the reality is there's no place for an ARB anywhere in a town's UDO. It needs to come out.
Got it.
And so we're going to regulate uses, height, density, setbacks, and then to some degree design.
Well, the term Greens Ward
Mhm.
has always been confusing to me. I mean, I know what it means, but I think it's confusing. That is not, when it comes to the mud district, that is not a requirement that the town is imposing. Or is it?
I think that it is.
Because
Right now it
there's
is.
offsets depending upon whether you're up by the gas station at 904 and well, the intersection by
It's in there.
Walgreens.
That's in there currently. So you can do that, and you are doing that.
And that goes back to what Ron was saying, that it has to do with the look as you come into the town.
Yep.
Okay.
So essentially, it sounds like everybody's on the same page. I mean, more or less, all of this is gone. That's their rules. The town needs to have their rules.
So the way I hear the plan is, yeah, it's gone, and we're going to have a set of design standards that may include visual standards, green standards, whatever.
Mhm.
And the plan is for staff to review that with these existing participants in this system.
Yep.
To make sure that we are at least minimum to them,
Yep.
and discuss with them maybe some things where we're above them because we think there's a good reason for it, that they may want to come on board and say,
Yep.
For instance, we say, you know, I don't know what it is. You got to have certain lighting or whatever, and theirs is not quite there. And we say, for safety reasons, we really think this is a good idea. They may be able to raise theirs and
It's
Be
got to
the
be
same.
separated. It's got to be two separate.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I'm not sure if this is going to occur, but if they request to be exempted, then they're going to need to come make that case and show that they're going to be committed to whatever it is that they've already got.
I'd
going
rather
on.
have them on board whatever we come up with.
Yep.
There may be a few bones of contention in there that
Mhm.
they may think the town is overreaching a bit, but we should be able to work that out. I would think it was the better way than trying to exempt.
So that's
Well, and there's work afoot right now with MB2 and the Mud District to communicate with the developers, and we have the benefit of having very unique developers, or the same developers on both MB2 and most of the Mud District. And those discussions, I think, are very fruitful.
Yep.
So, because we want them to succeed.
Yes.
All right, does that get us through
We're on the trees again.
around Appendix B? Then we come to Appendix C, heritage trees. Boy, I have no more in my binder after that. That's,
Well, I have Appendix D. I don't know why you don't.
I don't have it.
isn't Appendix
D,
D,
D
just
was all the changes, right?
all the previous changes?
Right. So we won't need that anymore, obviously,
that's correct.
until we start changing it again.
You'll have a you'll have a page that will be behind the cover on your new one. It will identify the date and the change, and the whole thing won't be put in because that's confusing. And then someone can look up the date and the change by the meeting rather than another 60 or 80 pages. That, anyways.
Yes. Are we going to retain the history, or we really don't need to? Because Appendix D right now does have a history as to what's happened to this UDO over several years.
I don't believe so. I mean, and I don't have it printed before me, so I apologize. But I mean, you're starting with fresh, and
Yeah.
and whenever.
Well,
it is,
I guess the definition of this is it isn't really just a review; it's a rewrite
correct.
of the Unified Development Ordinances.
Yes.
So we are starting.
So when the council votes, there's going to be a time where this one, the new one, will supersede the old one, and the old one's gone, right?
That's
They're
right.
They're going to vote on an ordinance that says, as of this date,
Hmm.
this book is gone. At 12:01 a.m. on this date, the new book is the book.
Just like they will for the land use plan,
Right.
Yes.
which is the same thing.
Yep.
It's nice to know what people thought 20 years ago, but it is what's important is what are the requirements today based upon society,
Yes.
societal changes. All right, in dealing with the heritage trees, without getting into the weeds, and no pun intended, Wes, what are your thoughts? What do you think you're going to do with
Sure.
Appendix C?
My goal, similar to what has been discussed, is we would probably have a regulated tree, and then perhaps have a specimen tree, and then that specimen tree is perhaps going to be limited to one or maybe two species. I think that you would be wise to set a specimen tree at a live oak over a certain caliper and really try to protect those. You can add in other oaks into there, but they have shorter lifespans.
We have very few live oaks in Sunset Beach.
You've got a lot.
You got a lot.
You've got a lot.
There's a lot more other oaks. Than
There's
there are
more
live
other oaks. So there, I mean, you could set other oak species as well. A lot of the other oak species, once they get over 50 years old, unless they're very well maintained, they're reaching the end of their lifespan. But you could set those two. I mean, to me, live oak is the most important and the most resilient, and very valuable. I don't think that, for example, pine trees, if folks want to keep them, that's fine. Or if it's a longleaf, which are difficult also for people to differentiate between a loblolly. You could go to protect a longleaf and a live oak and
Well,
other
it is the
oaks.
state tree of North Carolina, isn't it?
It is, but it is also it's also not the type of tree you want near your house in a hurricane. So there's a balancing act there. So yes, it would be I think that you would be wise to move away from these smaller hollies, dogwoods. It's not to say that a holly and dogwood is great, but if you really want to move towards being very strict on protecting species, figure out the big ones with a big canopy that provide a lot of value. Keep those. Other things, let's just, let folks do what they will with them.
I mean, the Bradford pear looks very good to me if we want to.
No, get rid of it. But we not that when we started rehashing this 2 years ago, whenever it was, I don't remember anymore. We did have a public speaker, and I don't remember who it was, talked about
I attended that meeting. Yeah.
you don't. What we're saying here on the oak is true, but I think her point was, if I remember correctly, there are other species of trees that are
Significant.
to wildlife
That's correct.
that should also be considered. And my suggestion has been all along that we spend some money and hire somebody
And she's absolutely right.
to go over this and agree, come up with a shorter, more concise list.
Remember, you got to understand, she's right, but she's never tried to comply with state stormwater rules, and so that's the problem.
Well, I guess, I mean, the list to me is a way to say, okay, we understand the stormwater issue, but when you have these trees on your site, there needs to be a step to say, okay, we want to create some mechanism that incents or enforces the developer to make some amendment or make a case that says, hey, this is in an area where, based on my stormwater requirements, I can't do anything. Can I be given the right to remove these trees?
That's where we're getting at. If you go the direction where you're going to require a variance to remove a certain size tree, it needs to be a significant tree, because basically the town is going to take the position that if you're a live oak over, I don't know what size we would come at, 24, 30-inch tree, can't remove it, period, unless you get a variance. If you take that position, you cannot say that you can't remove a holly of 8 inches, and you can't, that's just not realistic, I think. And part of the reason why there's been such ire towards local governments on tree preservation, because a lot of the rules are unrealistic, that folks can't comply with them.
Well, I have not experienced that. The ire tends to come from the other direction, in that why have they taken out the entire plant substructure in an area?
I understand, but you should ask them if you should buy that piece of property then, and you can do with it what you will. It goes back to, again, these folks are afforded certain rights, and we cannot take those away.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Those folks are afforded certain rights. It's the same as you're afforded certain rights to be able to use your property. And so that is a difficult thing. And I'm not trying to carry the developer's
I understand.
flag here, but I'm just trying to figure out the best way that you guys can figure out how to keep certain trees, and so you're not seeing a clear-cutted site.
I'm uncomfortable with just saying live oaks over 24 inches and then we disregard everything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think you can also take, as an example, this is what we would do with live oaks. Let's come up with a list of species that we want to protect and keep, and go from there. I mean,
you can add in
probably the most heritage tree in North Carolina is the longleaf pine, and we take out pine trees about every day.
But Wes is right. If I had a longleaf pine within 20 feet
No,
of
I
my
mean,
house and it was
correct.
50
I
feet
mean,
high, I know
yes.
what's going to happen. It's going to break 50% of
Yes.
the height. It's going to snap off and come into my house.
Yeah, that's the fear, and that's why. Yep. I'm saying it needs to be more than live oaks. but it can't be everything either. So coming
Well,
up with
I guess the question I have is what is the, I mean, I agree with you.
yeah.
I mean, what is the mechanism? I mean, do we need to hire a consultant to come in and say, based on, finding a compromise in terms of what are the trees that we need to attempt to preserve as opposed to those that we're willing to sacrifice? I mean, how do we make that list? I mean, this list is too long.
I think you've got to go back and trust the expert and the consultant that the town has hired. This is not the first one that the Cape Fear Council governments have done. This is not the first vegetation of tree list that the council has done. And trust him to come up with a list and provide it back to y'all and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, so let's just look on your next list here. So let's say we said it had to be a 30-inch tree, or let's just say theoretically it's a 30-inch tree, and we haven't gotten to drafting this section. On your canopy trees, you could keep magnolias, live oaks, several other oak species, and for example, perhaps bald cypress, although you're probably not going to have very many of those. That would be, a decent amount of species. But if someone's
Right now, we say if it's over 18 inches, it can be anything, and it's a heritage tree.
yeah,
That's not good.
I agree that's too small of a tree to realistically say that they're going to keep those on site. Like you can
Of
say
any
it,
species.
but it's no people aren't going to be able to develop their site.
Yeah, and I'm not, I mean, I think where I want to get to is I'm not saying, okay, this tree can't be touched, okay? But if you need to touch it, there needs to be a step. There needs to be an approval process that says, prove to us that there's a compelling reason why this set of trees has to go. Which may, and with the stormwater issues as you've outlined, as opposed to, what they did at the sanctuary, where they just came in, cut everything down, burned it, and went home. There has to be some middle ground where we can mediate that process in a way that doesn't overburden the developer or the homeowner, doesn't preserve trees that are going to come down into somebody's house in a hurricane, but yet preserves a certain ecological ambience of the town.
Yep.
That is one of the reasons why people move here.
Sure.
So
No, I know. And hey, look, I am fine for you guys to hire a consultant to do this, by the way.
We already hired you.
I thought you were it.
But my original proposal did it through a point system where we valued existing trees with a much higher point system as replacement trees, such that there would be a point scoring system that incentivized the developer to try to save trees because they would have to replace less.
Sure.
So
And I think we can look at
I don't
something
know,
like
Take
that.
care when they're.
Did you receive? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I said I don't know that they really would care when they're doing a big development. I think that's a wonderful idea, but I think if they're going in to put 400 homes in,
Sounds to me like you guys want to figure out how to keep some trees, even if it's 2 or 3, so long as they're
Of
big
a certain
ones.
size.
So long as they're big ones. And I think that, like I said, the way you got to do it is say you cannot remove this tree. Period.
If somebody does a tree survey and at least identifies trees of a certain size, and then they claim, and then they want to claim, maybe appropriately, that a stormwater regrading requirement would destroy that tree anyway. At least they need to show that with new and old contour lines on a drawing, and that's easy to do. And then they can prove to the town staff that I'm going to change the grade 3 feet where this tree is. And then it gives staff an opportunity to look at the grading, look at the stormwater, and say, you really don't have to do that.
That's,
Or I agree, you have to do that.
I think you have to. You have to say, yes, you've got this grade here at 13. You need to keep that grade that way, and you're going to have to figure out how to plan around it. And that's why you need to pick a very limited palette of trees, and you got to figure out how to plan around it. Because otherwise, I can make the argument, I can figure out how to grade that site to where everything gets removed.
I'm
We're
sorry,
back-
what?
And we don't have the expertise to refute that either in staff, which is obvious, yeah.
And
So,
technically, that
You're
really would
inclined
need
to
to
go
be.
really strict on a small palette of trees, and then basically where we're at on everything else. But where does that then the replacement tree thing
So
goes then?
that's where it comes into the
Are we
point.
still not
You
going
could
to
still
make them?
you could still
So-
do mitigation for a certain amount of trees.
So, say there's a big 50-acre site, and there's 10 regulated trees that they got to keep. Done.
Mhm.
But there's another 100 trees that they're taking out.
Mhm.
Some good trees, some not so good trees.
Mhm.
So, second that, are we still going to have then some replacement
Sure.
method?
I mean,
Say,
You can have that.
yeah,
Yes.
you took out.
Well, if you think about it, for single family residential,
So there, it's
the
two levels.
points
Yeah.
you talk about a point sheet. A point sheet exists.
Right.
It's for when they get a CO, they have to have an X amount of plantings or vegetation put back on the lot.
Yeah. Well,
The thing is that we're 30 years from seeing a lot of that in fruition, and to see it grown up. I mean, with respects to Sea Trail, you know, Mr. Dysinger lives in one of the oldest, if not the oldest, subdivision within Sea Trail.
We call it the historic.
The historic district. That's fine. The thing is those
lot of
trees were
antiques
planted.
there.
Yeah, and what people don't realize about Sea Trail is it once was a pulp mill or
Yeah.
International paper.
international paper. So when those trees
There
were
is no
replanted,
original trees in
Correct.
Sea Trail.
so when they
Yeah.
were replanted back, they were replanted in the early 90s. So they've had 30, almost 40 years to be able to come back and grow into something.
Yeah,
It'll get back to that point.
I'm sorry. We own property there in 91. Those weren't new trees. Those were trees that had been left specifically by the developer because of the philosophy that he wanted to embed in that development.
But and again, it's
There's
an
a dividing
example.
line called the Calabash Creek,
Right.
which separates everything south of it has deciduous trees. Everything north of it was just pine
Right.
from International paper.
So,
Right.
but moving forward, you've got. I agree with Wes. You've got to, the owners of the property has rights. The stormwater comes into play with this and has a lot of say. You've got to be able, I would say, part down on a certain amount over X amount of inch caliber, and allow the landscape and buffering plan to come into play, and allow the replanting schedule to come into play on each individual lot. And that's where we take our stance.
Some of these trees, other than the live oak, obviously get huge because they're 300 years old, or can be. There's other trees that I think are valuable that need to be on the regulated list, but I think their caliber needs to be smaller than the well, I don't want to say
So
live oak, but
let's just.
'cause they don't
and
get that
I
big.
think we're just going to end up talk to you about Jesus. Let's talk about preservation versus mitigation. So,
Okay.
sounds to me like at least theoretically, this board wants to identify a select few of trees for preservation. You're not removing it.
Correct.
Now we can talk
We're
about
talking about maybe
regulated.
half a dozen trees.
Yeah, regulated
Varieties.
for mitigation purposes, which can be smaller, so that if you remove certain other tree types, then you need to plant some of it back. Is that what?
Agreed. And what we had talked about previously a lot was coming up with a way that you don't take out an 18-inch oak and put in two-inch oaks or 2-inch trees and say, job done.
Thank you. Go.
And trying to come up with a system where, you're putting back, we knew we can never get equivalent. So you can't take out a 18-inch oak that was only, 50 years old and plant new ones is never going to be an equivalency, but at least try to get in the ballpark of, that you just can't put a bunch of little sticks in
But knowing
and say,
that,
I've taken care of it.
but knowing that a 4-inch caliper tree is probably about as big a tree
Right.
as somebody is going to
That's right.
legitimately plant, it's going to survive.
Correct. And you're going to have a difficult time sometimes finding even a 4-inch
Yes.
tree.
Which is why I was trying to come up with a system that forces them to try to save more of those intermediate sized trees.
Remember, that's what we're trying to figure out here.
Right.
Hey, you're keeping a very select few, period. And then we're going to agree that you do what you need to do to plant a certain number back. We don't care if they're 2 inches or whatever it is. Knowing that that's the reality, that they're going to have to figure out their site constraints in a much more difficult manner than just mitigating everything.
And you did say part of the preliminary plat can require a tree survey, right?
It will.
It does.
Oh, it
Yeah.
does.
Has to.
They'll have to plan their
But they
whole
have-
development
Does the
around it.
survey say you have to identify all of our regulated trees?
Depending on what the regulated trees are, they will.
Yes.
Yes.
And the size.
And the size, yes.
Size and
Because that's the
species.
only way we'll know.
That's
Right.
And
yep.
again, it won't come in on a legal pad. It'd have to come in via stamped.
But
Yep.
that's what a tree survey is.
Correct.
You have to the species and size have to be identified on that
Correct.
tree survey. So then you revert back to the list that you're going to come up with a half a dozen regulated trees.
Yeah, and we're really gonna have to figure this out, and we're gonna have to make sure that legal counsel's on board. I mean, there's a reason why lots are clear cut everywhere. So I mean, you guys, City of Wilmington has taken this stance. Not exactly that. Not to say that they sometimes don't exactly follow the rules so well, but I've had discussion with them about their reasoning behind it. I feel comfortable, seeing if this can work.
Doesn't the city of Wilmington have it in different sections of the city? It's not a one rule fits all. It's certain, because there's historical parts of Wilmington where the tree regulations, I believe, are more stringent.
Yeah,
And that's also different. Historical districts are regulated in almost a different way than other zoning districts are. They're a lot more restrictive. We do
they're allowed
not
to.
have a historical district in
And
Sunset
we looked
Beach.
at
They're mainly that there are non-residential and subdivision rules, not necessarily depending on they've taken the stance that I don't know what it is, that there's 2 or 3 species that if they're of a certain size, you can't remove them except through variance. And, period. Versus what usually is what we have always typically ended up with is a mitigation based ordinance. You can remove it if it's, someone can come up with a reason to remove it.
Well, I guess the sentiment is I'd like to see the balance between preservation and mitigation tilted a little more towards preservation as opposed to mitigation. I mean, we're struggling here to find a balance in something that's, there are a lot of devils in the details. I mean, I'd suggest, the Brunswick County Cooperative Extension, I mean, you could probably have somebody come down here gratis and look at this list.
Yeah, but I think Wes brought a good point up there. They don't have to deal with stormwater, and they don't really. We're looking at it from an overall picture, trying to make reasonable development practical.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I agree. I'm sure their list would be a lot longer than the list we'd come up with, but I think we'd get some good feedback in terms of what are the things that we ought to spend some time trying to preserve as to some of the other things that are nice to haves. I mean, clematis is on this list. I mean, we don't need to preserve clematises in this community.
I think I named off a couple that we were going to try to look at.
Yeah, and the heritage list, and the heritage list is a list created by the extension centers. I mean, that inputs, is it native? Does it promote wildlife and other things? So there's a lot of reasons trees are on this list that aren't really relevant to what we're trying to do. Um, and
I mean, there's really only 5 on our list now, right?
Yeah, 5 or 6, I thought.
5,
but
right?
yes.
A, B, C, D, E. Well, no. D, I guess, right? 4. Live oak, a red bulb, a flowering dogwood, and American holly. The rest of these are accepted plant material. So actually only C1 is our regulated tree, right?
Yes. Well, that's heritage tree, and then the other ones are.
No, the other, so only C1 is the regulated
Yeah, but
tree.
E is regulating trees that are 18 inches or greater.
Right. So, but A, B, C, and D by species,
By
named,
species,
are
yes.
the only regulated trees. We got this E in here, which has gotten to, which just extends it out, that where we're saying that really E is disappearing. When we're going to do an redo A, B, C, D, or maybe.
So you can still you can make these heritage trees regulated trees, and then you can add a specimen tree category.
Right.
And the specimen would be the ones where you got to keep it. Period.
Right.
So
we might have, again, 4 to 6, probably when we're done. Now,
Yeah.
whether I guess the question is the American holly, the flowering dogwood, a redbud, and a live oak the ones that should be regulated or not? We kind of agree live oak, I guess. I'm not a tree person, so I don't know what these other 3 are exactly. Whether they should be on this list, or sounds like probably not, I guess. I don't know.
Do you have any resources to lean on?
Sure. I mean, there's ample resources out there. Cooperative Extension, other resources. So I do have my master's in landscape architecture as well. So,
And a lot of the trees that are on this heritage list are not endemic to, I mean, they don't grow around here. So
that's correct. But the other key with this is when you're mitigating, you have to have access to be able to get the trees to purchase at nurseries. And there's a lot of non-native species that do well here, and they do well in nurseries, unfortunately. So,
Well, okay.
but yes,
we need to
we'll
come
work
up
on
with a
this.
smart plan. I think we're going to try to preserve, mitigate when we can't preserve, but we still have to follow the state rules.
Okay.
That's the nutshell.
Sounds good.
All right. Any comments as we've at least gone to this step?
I'd say
Planning board, civil, anything?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, me too. Ron,
Good.
good.
Richard.
Yeah.
All right,
Mr. Chair, if I
Chad,
may.
what do we do next?
So first of all, congratulations, we're done with the audit. I think that's first and foremost and celebratory. I would say I'll turn it back over to Wes and let him explain what we're getting ready to go into now. Now that we've covered the audit, we will go into the actual text, redlined, and what will be changed. So I'll turn it back over to Wes.
Sure. Thank you, Chad. All right. So from here on out, what we'll be doing is tackling new material. And so you'll be given, when we get together, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, new material that you'll get, and then be prepared to review for the next meeting.
That's this binder that
Yes.
you started off with.
Yes, sir. And so with that, you should have Article
Yeah,
1
I have
and then
mine.
the first part of Article 2. And
Yes.
so similar to the audit, we would just start, with page 1 of Article 1 and review this material.
And you also gave us a little bit of Article 7.
Yes, Article 7 definitions. Yes, thank you, sir. And so you'll get where there's new definitions that are not currently in Appendix A that are relevant to your new material. Where I think you need them, I'll be in there, and it'll be in there. And there may be other places where, as we go through this review, that you say, hey, what about this definition? And I'll make a note and create a definition for it.
You're talking about, well, we did talk about restructuring really the whole outline, table of contents for the existing or new UDO. Does the information you're giving us now follow the old format, or the new?
The new
That-
format.
The new format, thank you, that's a great point. And then, and I think I alluded to this at the last meeting, where there is material in here that is not underlined or stricken through. It's your old material. It's just been put into the format, the new structure. So,
The style guide of May 19th
Yep.
is what we're still following.
yes, sir, that's correct. So, yeah, with that, you've got Article 1 there, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, for to start going through this article. Questions, comments, concerns, unless there's no other questions.
Okay, let me get my, what Ron just said. It's the May 19th new format that
Right.
we're just so, for the edification of people watching on YouTube.
And should be much easier for both staff and citizens to follow.
All right, just to be clear, this is our, I don't want to call it second bite of the apple, but it's an opportunity for us to, with our margin notes that we have, to verify that things have in fact been addressed that we've discussed.
And there'll be new things and things that need to be further revised, the whole spectrum. But all this material is draft. This is not, we're done. This is draft.
Right. But once we go through this, through the whole thing, then that is it. That is what's going to town council.
You'll get we'll go through all of the material,
Yes.
and then you'll get a full new clean copy.
We're not going to go through it again.
We won't go through it again, but you'll get a new clean copy just to ensure that all the changes that we suggest get incorporated into that final draft that you'll then send to council.
Will we have meetings to really take a third whack at it then? If all of us,
Yeah,
all of a sudden we see things have maybe
absolutely.
not been incorporated to our understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we want to make sure that you guys are good with this before it gets moved on.
So essentially, we're going to do a second draft,
Yes.
get a revised
Full thing.
full thing that
Yeah.
is what I would call a
Final
tentative
draft.
final.
Yes.
And then we will genuflect and say, no, this is final.
Yep.
Send it up.
Yeah.
July of 2023, you'll get a final draft UDO with planning board revisions. That's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, it's on the schedule.
August will be the final draft UDO planning and review and recommendation. September, tentatively, will be a joint work session
Where are you
review.
reading this from, Chad, please?
The layout and
The original
scope of
proposal.
work from
Scope.
Yep.
Wes.
And
In September, you're looking at a joint work session with the planning board and the town council.
this is if we manage to maintain the schedule. But
Correct.
the key is that, yes, we'll go through all this. For example, if someone says on page 1-3, hey, it should say zoning ordinance instead of zoning map, whatever it is, that change we'll keep a log of, and it'll be incorporated into your new final draft.
So did
I
I
thought you said 2023.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So that confused me. You
Yeah.
meant
Yes.
2022.
No,
2023.
he's looking at the schedule, page 3 or 4,
Yeah.
on his original scope
Yes.
of work.
Yes, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Schedule.
Yes, so What Chad was reading was,
And the
was on
audit
page
finishes
4.
in June. Let's go to the top. The original audit, which we've just finished, was supposed to finish in June of
Yeah.
2022.
Right.
Yep.
Okay,
So we're behind a month.
we're behind a month. Yes.
Actually, we're back on schedule.
Okay. Then
Oh yeah,
Re-
August.
reviewing the phase 2 starts now.
Yes.
If we get done sooner, great. If it goes longer, it's just
Pete, what I was referring to is the last
stage.
on the last stage on the backside.
And Chad was just saying that you guys are going to have due time to make sure you're comfortable with it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now I understand.
Yeah.
Even though that's not called a separate phase, all those bold
Yes.
Mhm.
print ones could have been phase 3, I guess. So we got from now until the end of June of 2023 to go section by section on this first draft.
Yes, sir.
What is the what does staff think is the frequency of that? Will we stay on the same schedule we're on now, where the first meeting of the month would be our regular planning board meeting, if there is in fact something that's been brought by
yes,
citizens?
absolutely. That would be, as long as Wes is available, that's how we will
So
proceed.
the second meeting in the middle of the month, which we're in right now,
Yep.
that would continue on each month
Yes,
until for a year.
unless there's a
Months.
conflict or whatever else happens. But yes, and I think it's mainly going to be that second meeting, unless for some reason we were able to accommodate the first meeting, just with scheduling.
You may not be able to
Yes, sir.
do that.
Yes.
Because we're here, but
Yeah.
particularly if we don't have anything, a citizen or
Yeah, there's a few
text amendment
there's a
that's
few
coming
more
before us.
vacancies in this area. Planning directors leaving. I'm not one of them, just to be clear on that. Where Wes is having to cover, so his availability is becoming short and slim.
We could rent you out.
Hmm?
We could rent you out at a fee.
I'll let you deal with Lisa on that.
All right. What is the?
Do we want to start? We don't only have 10 minutes. Start on
Yeah,
Article 1 or not?
We have a 2-hour limit that we've imposed. However, we could, by unanimous vote, extend that.
I would simply ask that I did not bring my draft, so if we do extend, can we take a 10-minute adjournment so I can fly home and pick up?
Well, at home, I've got one in my office. I'll give you.
Well, it's
I need one too.
Chad, what would you think if we started this afresh the next meeting to give us a chance, and I'll just be selfish, to give me a chance to wrap my head around this, because I've looked at it, but I've not studied it.
Sure.
Let me ask the board this. And I know this has been given to you.
We got it 2
I
months
think
ago.
If we didn't anticipate being in the audit, getting through the audit today, which I'm ecstatic that we did. If y'all are not prepared to talk about it, then yes, we need to
That's fine.
refresh.
Well, I'm prepared to talk about it, but I don't know that I have studied it enough to be complete in my thoughts.
And
I
like I
have to
said,
jump back on it
Yeah.
in a later phase.
I don't think anybody's going. I don't think any of us would really object to ending this at a 2-hour limit, allowing us to breathe, and then starting this back. We're on schedule.
Mhm.
So
What?
I only made a cursory review and have 2 questions, I guess. So either we could start the questions now or go to the next one. I'm fine
Well,
either
it's
way.
at the pleasure of the board.
I don't have a copy of it with me. I thought I had it, but I didn't.
Yeah, me too. So why don't we take a breath and
Well,
see y'all next month
that being said,
or a few weeks.
and this isn't necessarily something for Wes, but I think as planning board business, and can we add something? We're not adding it to the agenda, but I'm asking staff for background on a couple of future planning board topics that are coming up our
Yes.
next meeting.
Yeah.
And the advertisements that are in the Beacon now for public notices.
So, if it's okay with you, go ahead and seek a decision, motion, be a second on starting fresh with this in August. Obviously, we'll have a regular planning board meeting in August, starting with this fresh in August. Well, Wes will come back to us and we'll start Article 1 of the draft.
Before I
material.
address these public meetings.
Yep, and then
Okay.
we'll go over the public meetings.
Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion. Go ahead.
Sorry, you've got new material here, gets you most of the way through Article 2. You'll have these oddly placed table of contents sections for the new ones. You just put it in the side pocket if it doesn't fit in there, and you'll be given again new definitions. So typically what you'll get is a updated table of contents for the new stuff, the new material that folds in behind your old material, and then the last will be any new definitions. And disregard page numbering. If the page numbering seems odd, just disregard it. Just go by sections.
It does.
Because what happens is the table of contents grow as so it's not an error. It's just it will all be rectified when you get a final draft.
Okay.
Are we,
Key is the content.
These
I know we just discussed this. I hate to go backwards. Are we sure we want to go all the way through it and then with a full book?
Yes.
Or is there, let me finish. Or is there any other logical breaks? Like, because it seems like it's hard to remember all of it. You know, do we go through 1, 2, and 3 and then get that finalized and look at that? I mean, is there any other logical breakpoints where we could look at obviously we're going section article by article, but then combine those articles and say, okay, here's a place, let's take another,
This becomes
So-
more of a thing between y'all and Wes at this point.
So
you know what I'm saying?
I've done this a lot of times, and so I can just tell you, yes, sir, we can do that, but go ahead and make that July 2023, July 2024, because what happens is then you'll get a revised article, and then we're going to change that again or whatever it is. Make your notes. I make notes. We try to make sure that all those changes are incorporated, and so that when you get that full draft, you're not just getting it piecemeal. Everything is there together because remember, all of this aligns, and we're just going to have to trust that we can incorporate all those changes. Otherwise, we will be here until eternity. With versioning control, modifications, and so on.
And there's in the same breath, I mean, I've had that same thought. There's no advantage to, okay, we've finalized this 3 sections in terms of a second draft or what we think is a final draft. You know, having the town council approve this in sections rather no. Okay. I had a
Because
feeling that was a
they
bad
relate
idea.
to the other
Yeah,
other
no,
sections.
never
What-
mind.
A
My
follow-up
bad idea
question
for the
too,
day.
kind of along those lines. We initially started off with the municipal code,
Mhm.
and we made some recommendations.
Mhm.
According to it, there were some definitions, there was some other things, and we're trying to get the municipal code and the UDO aligned. I don't see any response from you on any of the things we did in the municipal code. Now maybe it's in here and I just haven't seen it.
So anything that will require municipal code removal will come,
Or alteration.
or alteration will come towards the end of this process. But things
Even
that
though
are
we
in
did that first.
things that are in the municipal code that get pulled into the UDO will be pulled into the UDO as you get material.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
we'll
Okay.
work with Lisa and staff to go through the proper channels to get Muni Code updated and to get that procedure. But we can't pull it out
Okay.
until we've got it in here.
It's a different process.
Yes,
But town council still approves municipal code changes.
that's correct.
Okay.
So that will all. Whenever we get to the stage
Okay.
that council is approving this,
I understand.
it'll occur in the same.
It's just going to be a
breath.
different timing.
That's
on when
correct.
We address that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'd like to entertain a motion. It's coming on 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes left in our 2-hour stipulated time limit. To have a motion that at our next meeting, which would be on the 18th of August, I believe that's correct, which would be our next special meeting of the planning board, that we will then start with the second generation, if you will, that's been prepared by Council of Governments by Wes, and we'll start that second bite at that information.
Wes, are these mine?
Yes.
I second.
Any discussion? Unanimous vote, so approved.
Yep.
Do I have, I don't want to adjourn this special meeting, but I'd like the planning board, I've been privy to some conversations with you and Lisa on some of the things that town council has now approved for the planning board to, projects for the planning board to take. And anybody that read the Beacon yesterday would have seen 2 public notices that were put out where the Sunset Beach Planning Board will take certain actions. They're two certain actions.
Yep.
Can you explain them?
Sure,
to the board?
absolutely. So 2 weeks from today, so next Friday, you'll get a planning board packet that'll have 3 agenda items on it. First one will be a final plat for Phase 2 at Eastwood Bluffs. Should be pretty simple and straightforward. We've looked at that once already and already approved the preliminary. The other 2 are 2 text amendments that are staff initiated. First one will address the MB2 business district. Right now, you have very restrictive and constrictive setbacks in that business district when you look at the MB1 business district. Mainly MB2 is along the corridor, for along here down Sunset Boulevard and all the way down to the roundabout. We have been asked and worked with developers and landowners to, is there a way we can go through with this and be protect the residential district behind it, but also be a little bit more development friendly and welcoming. And like I said before, as we're working our way through this,
That's the
more
overlay.
user
That's the
friendly
overlay.
instead of user restrictive.
Well, it's the overlay as well.
So,
that's
yes.
a consideration for sure.
I am not looking to change the overlay. I am just looking at focusing in on the MB2.
The wording does talk about MB2 and the Gateway Corridor overlay review.
I'm not.
came from
I can
town
tell you right now, my draft language will not address the overlay district. I think the overlay district is worded out where it works great. I'm not looking to change the landscaping because now what we will look at will be setbacks, overall height, potentially, and the greensward, and that's kind of where we're at. The second
could also possibly address things like parking and mutual parking for multiple
It could.
uses,
Yeah,
multiple
it could.
establishments.
but also, again, I haven't got that draft finalized yet, so I don't exactly.
Just as a point, and I know you're pressed, but the earlier you can get it to us,
Yeah.
getting it on a Friday really means that we get Monday and Tuesday to kind of take a look at it, and then Wednesday to make a field trip and walk around.
Like I said, yeah, I'll get it to you as soon as I can, and yes, I am.
And we want to be responsive and complete.
The other one will be addressing special and temporary events. It's the temporary events, the way it's laid out right now, it's kind of pretty straightforward. We're looking to bring in any general code. Really, it's going to be a bigger modification on the general code, but that goes before council and not this board. So bringing anything in a general code to the UDO, addressing temporary events, also thought of as special events. We're just going to start calling these temporary events. Overall, everything as far as a temporary event will have one review procedure, modifying some changes, adding some things that will be extremely useful to that process and protect, allow these events to happen, but also protect the citizens in the town of Sunset Beach.
So is this in response to what's been in the paper about the market, the summer market?
For lack of better words, yes.
So shouldn't,
but not specifically.
Mainly
It
right
isn't
now,
focused on that.
and again, and
but what,
it comes down to this. You had, and I told council this a couple weeks ago, is that right now you have a review process for events in the park, and then you have a review process for everything else. So you're blending it and making it one big review process and getting mainly this is doing that and getting rid of the contradictory to the town code and the UDO and giving the UDO administrator power to review this stuff. It won't come to y'all, but y'all ultimately will review the text to where it changes and go from there.
So in terms of this review process, we won't see it. It'll be something that
Yes,
staff.
it's staff reviews now anyway.
Right.
But we're looking to add some permissions. So, for example, if you want to use private property as parking for an event, then you have to get written permission from that property owner saying that it's okay. Stuff like that. Implementing a review process procedure such as the TRC into this, where you can bring police, fire, and all these into one table directly with the applicant, is going to be something else that we require. It's not being unfair. It's more making everything fair straight across the board, and one set of eyes looks at it and one set of rules are applied to it.
No, I think this is a good development.
Going back to the MB2 review that's going to be coming to us
Mhm.
at our next regular meeting,
Mhm.
is the staff going to come up with specific recommendations on maybe some setback changes, some things like that? Are we going to have?
Oh, no. Yeah, I will bring you recommendations. It will be specific. All of it will be specific text. It will not be, well, let's talk and come up with X.
Because
feet.
that we spin our wheels when we do that.
Yeah, no, it will be specific. I've gotten a good grasp on this to where it will be very specific, and we'll be having a conversation on what I come up with.
And this is a citizen request?
No, this will be
No, this
staff
will be
initiated.
staff.
Okay.
It's with citizen input, with developer
Got it.
input, but
Yeah.
it's specific input. Seeing that we have no one in the audience for public comments, we will go by item 5 under old business, and item 6 is adjournment. And I'd like to hear a motion that we adjourn this meeting. Now, we're not adjourning until the next meeting. We're just adjourning this meeting. Okay. To adjourn this meeting,
So moved?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting so adjourned. Thank you, planning board.
Thanks, Wes.
Wes?